Dario Amodei, the founder and CEO of Anthropic, the company that makes one of our favorite tools, Claude Code, is meeting with a bunch of other rich people in Davos, Switzerland to talk about how to make the world a better place. And when he says stuff about the future of software engineering and I tend to listen. And he's been on a bunch of different interviews, and I've taken out little clips and stuff like that that will matter to people like us, AI engineers and entrepreneurs. One of the most interesting things he said has to do with kind of the death of software engineering as we know it, which is scary, but I do think that this is a reality that we're moving towards. If you all are using Claude Code, you know how little code you have to write to produce incredible software now. But he said, I have engineers. In fact, the team that leads one of our lead products, he says he hasn't written any code in the last 2 months. He says he's edited it, he's looked at it, but it's all been written by Claude. So I promise you that the guys who are working on the coding for Claude Code are great engineers in and of themselves. But we saw this when they released Cowork, and he's got another quote about this that I'll share with you later on. These people are using Claude Code to write pretty much all of their code. So what does that mean for people like you and me, who are probably not as good at coders as the people at Anthropic working on Claude Code? To me, just this just means that stuff like the build anything app that I'm working on right now will become even more and more important, that it's going to be the problem solving that is going to be important in the future, not necessarily your ability to write code. Code is going to become more and more disposable, and people are going to be able to spin up their own applications and without any expertise. So if you've been thinking that this is something that's happening, it's just been confirmed by Dario and Anthropic. And this next thing is talks a little bit about product market fit and some of the things they saw that led to what we now know as Claude Cowork. So if your users are willing to endure a terrible UI, the CLI, so essentially the terminal that we work in, which is a terrible UI, to get a result, you found a burning house problem. Look for where people are currently struggling with technical tools to do non-technical work. So he saw people in the company and just users like us that were willing to use stuff like an IDE or a terminal to build stuff in Claude Code. And we had all these kind of superpowers as developers that other people didn't know about. And they just released Claude Code, which allows, sorry, they just released Claude Cowork, which I've shown on this channel, a few videos ago, that gives some of this power to normal people. And now Claude Code can access files on someone's desktop and hook up to all of its other tools like Claude and Chrome to run agents for people without them having to go into an IDE. And I thought this was a pretty interesting, signal from him saying that, hey, we're watching what people are doing and they're reacting faster. And I think this is one of the reasons that Anthropic and Claude Code is moving so far ahead in the coding world compared to Gemini and especially to OpenAI is they really seem to have an eye on what users are doing and how they're using their products. And they are, leaping out in front of the competition because of this. Next up is the Zeroth economy or the great decoupling. And this is kind of scary, but it's a great opportunity for people like us who are focused on this stuff. But essentially, he says the signature of this technology, AI, that is it's going to take us to a world where we have very high GDP growth and potentially also very high unemployment and inequality. Now, that's not a combination we've ever seen before in the past. The idea that we could have 5 or 10% GDP growth, but also, 10% unemployment, it's not logically inconsistent at all. So, what he's saying here is that he sees a great decoupling happening where the world is going to split into two groups. One very small group who owns technology and uses technology to make tools, and everyone else. And I made a video about this a while back. I'll probably link it in the description where I talked about how it's really only 10% of us. And I promise you, if you're watching this, you're in this 10% that need to worry about getting replaced. And the reason that's so important is because the world is going to split into two groups. And I think he's about right about, I don't know, 10% or so of the world are going to be the people who are making tools. And this is why big conversations about universal basic income and stuff are coming up, is because we really don't know what to do in a world where robots and AI are doing everything for us. Do I believe that that's actually going to happen? No, I don't. I think that AI is going to create more problems in a good way. I mean, the surface area of the problem space of humanity is going to grow, and it's actually going to create more opportunity for people like you and me to go out there and solve problems. anytime there's a big revolution, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the Gutenberg Press or the Internet Revolution, there's always doom and gloomers that come out and say this is going to destroy everything as we know it. And they're right, it will. But every time something like this happens, it generally, in fact, it's always created more opportunity, not less. So the World Economic Forum is a place where people want to create policies to rein this stuff in so they can be seen as being responsible to their voter bases. And I promise you, a big Luddite movement is going to grow within the next year or two. And you're going to see a lot of pressure on politicians and rich people that own companies to at least seem sympathetic to AI coming and taking other people's jobs. But I promise you, they're not. Politicians are worried about keeping power, and CEOs of major companies are worried about increasing their market share and how much money they make. They're not philanthropists, folks. The next thing he talks about is having a country of geniuses in a data center. He says, I've called where we're going with this. A country of geniuses in the data center, right? So imagine 100 million people smarter than any Nobel Prize winner, and it's going to be under the control of one country or another. This is when he was talking about what we should do with like our chip manufacturing. We have a company called NVIDIA, and we're actually selling those chips to China. So there's kind of two competing theories on what we should do here. One is that we should restrict the access to chips and keep them here with us and not let anyone else have it. The other idea on this is that we should let anybody in the world who wants to buy these chips to buy them so that they are locked into our supply chain and our logistics in the United States, and then we can, control their access to these chips. I see both sides of it, but Dario is clearly on the side of, hey, we should restrict the chip access to the rest of the world because he likens it to stuff like the nuclear bomb as a technology. You wouldn't want to just give, Kim Jong Il or Kim Jong Un access to a nuclear bomb just because you make it and you have the supply chain for it. I'm not going to get into my thoughts on this in this video. Maybe I'll do another video on this. But I think what is interesting here is he was talking about this in terms of which country controls this. But for us, we're going to have access to 1 million or 100 million geniuses inside of our code bases and have access to those. So the question to me is, what are we going to do with access to 100 million people that are smarter than any Nobel Prize winner? This next one's really important for entrepreneurs or anybody who's trying to create software, and this is the Moat Crisis. And he says software is going to become cheap, maybe essentially free. The premise that you need to amortize a piece of software you build across millions of users, that may start to be false. At the level of companies, what are the moats when software becomes cheap and then subsequently the rest of knowledge work becomes cheap? So this is a question we all have to ask ourselves. And when you see people on the internet talking about like what's going to happen in the future, I tend not to believe them. And, because here we have Dario saying that we don't know. We've never asked a question like that. And we've thought about models in a certain way. So there's going to be a huge scramble at the level of companies to figure out what their moat is. I know I can make software right now in a weekend that mimics the software I made for companies I worked for 3 or 4 years ago in a weekend. Those companies I worked for 3 to 4 years ago were multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar companies that had teams of engineers working on them. Now we can go replicate software like that in a weekend. So what are we supposed to do? The ability to write code is no longer going to be the thing that builds a moat around a company. And I actually think this is a good thing because we're going to live in the golden era of software where it's going to become cheaper and it's going to become a lot better and you're going to have way more options. So if you become part of this economy who's building little pieces of software, you're in the right place because despite what the Luddites and the doom and gloomers say, we're getting ready to walk into a world where everybody's going to be able to create software. Everybody's going to be able to sell software. And that's good for people like you and me. As a reminder of that, if you want to sign up for testandprod.co, I build software. It's free. You can use it and it will help you build software a lot faster in a lot more organized way. And this week I'm launching a new tool called the Build Anything app. And if you sign up for the Conductor Framework here, you'll get free access to beta test that application. And I'll end off with this quote because this is a quote about software we've all been using lately, Claude Cowork. And he said, we just released a new thing called Claude Cowork. This was a version of our tool, Claude Code for non-coding. This was built in a week and a half almost entirely with Claude Opus. So there you have it. I mean, they built a groundbreaking app in a week and a half, and they didn't even code it. They had Claude Opus code it for you. So this says to me, every time I feel like I'm in my comfort space and I want to go get my hands dirty and get into the code and start developing something in the IDE or terminal, it's just a reminder that I need to pull back and, let Claude Code take over and do its thing. Honestly, I'm not even doing git commits anymore by typing them in. I'm letting Claude Code do that, which is super lazy, but why would I do it? It's, this thing can do it faster and it writes better commit comments than I do. Anyway, that's all for today. I will talk to you all tomorrow. Thanks for watching.